Well, 60% of voters in a new poll in Louisiana agree with the decision to legalize marijuana, and steps are in progress to at least decriminalize it statewide. Politicians from New Orleans are taking the lead on that issue.
Representative Candace Newell, who represents part of New Orleans East, introduced two marijuana bills this legislative session. One aimed at decriminalizing small amounts of marijuana, another for regulation of recreational growth, manufacturing, and sales. That bill allows people with no violent criminal record to apply for growth or sales licenses and gives preference to those who live in areas with high arrest rates.
There's too many African Americans, Hispanic Americans who've been negatively impacted by the arrest rates. Black and brown people are arrested at a much higher rate than their white counterparts, and the jail times are much higher. So it's a negative impact to our entire community.
And there's bipartisan agreement. A new survey by JMC Analytics shows that Republicans in Louisiana support loosened marijuana laws. About 3/4 of people polled in Republican-held districts are in favor of legalizing marijuana. And while those issues make their way through the state legislature, the city of New Orleans is looking to issue fewer tickets for marijuana possession.
When it comes to cannabis use, recreational cannabis use, that youth among races and ethnicities is pretty equal. So the fact that here in our city, you're seeing, close to 90% of people who are getting tickets, they are Black, that seems like skewed not right.